Back on MorningLine, thanks for joining us. Our final segment this morning talking about Syrian refugees and what may or may not be done with them here in the state of Tennessee in the wake of what happened in Paris, France. And we had Representative Glenn Cassada on earlier, who's advocating a position of perhaps, rounding up the refugees or at least keeping an eye on them from Syria to make sure there's no terrorist threat. With us on a counterpoint for the second half of the show is Evan Cathy. He's with the Tennessee Immigrants and Refugees Rights Coalition. Also, Mohammed Hassan is a refugee from Somalia, came here when you were 4 years old, correct?
14.
About 14 years old. Okay. Well, thank you both for coming on this morning. I was trying to get a handle on, most people don't really think about refugees coming into this country necessarily unless you're hearing about some Cuban baseball player that seeks political asylum when he was here, and signs with the Yankees or something like that. But aside from that, we don't think too much about how many really come to this country. Every year from around the world, thousands of refugees, correct? Not just from Somalia, not just from Syria, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And here in Tennessee, I think we resettle maybe around 1,400 a year or so.
And what is, if you don't mind, I guess we should have hit this earlier, what in your mind is the definition of a refugee? Not just anyone can say, I'm leaving my country, I'm coming over.
Yeah.
What's the definition of a refugee?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of misinformation about who refugees are. In order to become a refugee, the United Nations has to designate you and give you refugee status. So that's the first step. So you are somewhere else in the world. You have fled your country and you have applied with the United Nations for refugee status.
Now, the reason is, again, okay, you have people sometimes leaving their countries just because they want to come to America. That's not enough.
Yeah.
They're leaving their countries under adverse conditions. Is that correct?
You must prove a well-founded fear of persecution or
Okay,
violence.
there you go. That's what I was after. Go ahead.
And those persecutions sometimes is for your life. People are trying to kill you because of your faith. Religious persecution.
Yeah, you're not criminals. You're leaving because they're targeting you for one of those reasons.
So and sometimes because of your faith, religious persecution. Sometimes it's political. Somebody want to kill your entire tribe or your entire race in that country. So you basically lose everything
genocide.
you have.
Okay.
And so those are some of the reasons that one person become a refugee. No one packs up and leave their home or their home country. But once we come here, we want to call this home. We want to integrate. We want to put our roots here and build our community, and start our American promise. That is, adding our own story to America's story. But unfortunately, the kind of discourse and rhetoric we are having is that cornering refugees, and as a nation of immigrant, we shouldn't be really talking about refugees or even any other immigrant group like that.
Do you imagine that this will die down? I mean, obviously still, it's big in the news, but I go back to when there was the big controversy over that mosque being built in Murfreesboro, or just outside Murfreesboro in Rutherford County, and people being like, oh my gosh, well, it's been there now, and it had been there for years prior to this, and nothing bad has happened. I'm in touch with law enforcement there all the time. Nothing has. There was all this fear-mongering at the time. And it is because it was an intense time, nationally and internationally. But with this, what do you think is going to play out here? It's not the first time these kind of issues have been brought up. But is this worse than in the past, and what do you suspect will happen?
Yeah, I don't know, but what I hope is that if there are more acts of terror throughout the world, that we stop responding in fear. And I think if we look to our history here in Nashville especially, and how fortunate we've been to have received refugees who've fled some very difficult circumstances, we'll realize that continuing our refugee resettlement program is good for Nashville, and it's the right thing to do. If you look in the early 90s, people fleeing Saddam Hussein, we welcomed them with open arms. Saddam Hussein was gassing Kurdish people in Iraq. They came to Nashville. Many Kurdish members have integrated into our community, and they've been here for 2 decades, and they are a part of our Nashville community. After that, it was members from Somalia and other parts in Eastern Africa. It was more Iraqis after the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and all these folks we've welcomed, and they've become a part of our community. They've made Nashville better. They've made Tennessee better. I think that we're going to see that with whatever new group of refugees come, they will come and they will become a part of our community, and they're going to build it and make it more vibrant and stronger. And we mustn't let fear dictate the decisions we make, especially if we're conflating refugees with people who want to commit acts of terror. Refugees flee people who commit acts of terror. So to tie the two together doesn't make any sense. And it's fear-mongering is all it is. It's just stoking fear.
Yes, I think to some extent I'm concerned because you mentioned Murfreesboro, so there's a huge underlying sentiment that is anti-Muslim, xenophobic, and also anti-immigrant. Now, it has been evolving. If it's not one group, it's one group, but under the surface, it's becoming disturbingly mainstream. Mm-hmm. You have leaders who you know swear to defend and serve everybody, and then coming out that they are in very powerful positions and saying really horrible things about you know these populations. And now as a result, they are leaders and they have these platforms. They create the entire community of followings. Right, mm-hmm. It's disturbingly becoming mainstream. But on this issue of refugees, is about now it's coming down to, are we going to walk away from our values? Mm-hmm. Right, we always have been a welcoming country, and it's a Thanksgiving season that when pilgrims come to America, Indian Americans give them turkey.
Yeah. Right.
Syrian refugees are arriving. Are we going to welcome them?
Yeah, we're going to welcome. It is amazing to me to some degree how, and I guess it's a natural human reaction. When you fear things, then you unfortunately, in this country or elsewhere, you're so quick to give up your civil liberties. You remember, of course, after the horrible September 11th attack, the Patriot Act coming in, and they want to bring that back now, where they basically, had access to every. Is it? People have told me that they want to be able to feel safe sleeping at night in their own beds, and if that means sacrificing some of their civil liberties, so do it. So be it. And that's their point of view. I disagree with that entirely, because I don't think doing so and sacrificing your civil liberties makes you any safer. But that seems to be what's happening here. Yeah. I mean, when you come here to this country, you are instantly afforded the rights of the Constitution, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, and so with these Syrian refugees that are here now.
Sure. I mean,
well, so now they're asking to put on, surveillance is what the representative was talking about. At the very least, surveillance. And we all talk about, racial profiling. I think that's almost the definition of it. You're Syrian. We're going to be watching you. Well, I mean, whether you're any race, you're black, we're going to pull you over, just because of the color of your skin. And that's not right.
Right, that's not right. And I think when refugees come, for example, at the airport, we get an I-94 papers, and within a week, we get our social security card.
Okay.
And within 3 years, we get a green card. And after 5 years, if I learn all the American history, that George Washington is the founder, that red, blue, and white, and all these civic lessons, I'll become a naturalized citizen in 5 years. Okay. Now, if we want to designate refugees, how can we make them patriotic and integrate them in our community? And what always made America stronger is that we always find a way to, when new people come here, to integrate them, add them to our communities, and that always made us stronger. And now we're talking about designating certain groups of people and alienating them and putting them in camps. And that's just an American. We are going away from the American way. Mm-hmm. And these folks are, even the very reason they're here is that they're running away from that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Evan, real quick, as we wrap things up, have you had some contact with some of the the Syrian refugees? I don't know, maybe you know a few of them. At this point, are they, just kind of watching? There's not much they can do, but they've got to be uncomfortable with the situation right now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's not many Syrian refugees in Tennessee.
Right, there's less than 50.
There's a handful of families. And the families that are here, I think probably it took them maybe 5 to 10 years to go all the way through the refugee resettlement process to get here.
Okay. Now, the representative was saying it's not so much them that have been here, clearly, but with what's happening in Syria, we could expect perhaps hundreds more in the next year or two to come to Tennessee or certainly into the United States.
Our refugee resettlement program is slated to look a lot like it has over the past 10, 20, 30 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, around 1,500 people will be resettled each year.
From all around the world.
From all
not
over
necessarily
the world.
Talking Syrian refugees. We had, I think, some 1,500 last year, or this year to this point, and only 40 of them came from Syria.
Right.
Of course, things have changed in Syria, and more people coming from there.
Sure.
But but in a way, what do you imagine some of these refugees are feeling? What are you feeling today?
I think I mean, sometimes it's shocking and saddening because you're really working hard and trying to add value to your community. And I think for the new folks just arrived, after all the trauma they've been through, and then people are telling them that round them up, I just cannot imagine. So the few I talked to, I just surprised, and just also just the fact that they're alive and thankful. and trying to really navigate the environment. So I think it's very unfortunate that we're having this kind of debate in our country about rejecting people who are very vulnerable instead of welcoming them. And that's the exact, for us to reject them, that's exactly what terrorists and bad guys want.
Yeah, and I would say that if we decide to end refugee resettlement in Tennessee, terrorists win. That's how terrorists win. You know, I think there's a chance we may see some bad legislation coming up in the spring. Representative Cassida mentioned rounding Syrian refugees up. This is dangerous talk.
We'll do more on this. Evan, Kathy, thank you for coming on. Mohammed Hassan, thank you both. I really appreciate the conversation. Back with more right after this.